Miss Diana Ross.
Even at birth, Diana Ross made a unique entrance in Detroit, Michigan on March 26, 1944. Diane was the second daughter born to Fred Ross, a worker at the American Brass Company, and his wife Ernestine, a teacher. Both parents worked hard to give their children a good home, but the arrival of 3 more children forced the family to move to bigger quarters on Belmont Avenue. One of their neighbors was a slick teenager named William Smokey Robinson. Diane admired Smokey, but she was really competing for the attention of another older man, her father. Diane's decision to become a singer infuriated her hard-working dad. By 1958, Fred and Ernestine Ross had 6 children to support. Money was getting tighter and tighter. They decided to move their family once again, this time to a brand new housing development near downtown. On Diane's 14th birthday, the Rosses settled in on St. Antoine Street in the Brewster Projects. At the Brewster Projects, 15-year-old Florence Ballard was turning heads with her curvaceous figure and booming voice. In 1958, Flo and neighbor Mary Wilson made a fateful connection. Along with neighbor Betty McGlown, Flo Ballard and Mary Wilson set out to find a 4th girl to complete their group. They turned to the new arrival, Diane Ross. From the get-go, the Primettes looked beyond the projects.
Florence, Diane, myself, and Betty all decided that we were going to pursue getting a record deal. And that's when we had the audition with Berry Gordy.
Berry Gordy Jr. was a Detroit-based songwriter who had some success writing songs for R&B crooner Jackie Wilson. But by 1959, Gordy and his buddy Smokey Robinson were fed up with substandard royalties. Motown executive Suzanne DePaz.
Smokey said to him, after they got a royalty check for something like $3.19, that, well, we might as well try this, or Berry, you might as well try this yourself, because if you're not going to get paid, what's the difference?
Gordy took Robinson's advice. He borrowed $800 from his family and formed his own label. Motown expert Rick Bush.
That became initially Tamla, and the second label they started was Motown.
Gordy set up shop in a small house at 2648 West Grand Boulevard in central Detroit, then used his considerable charm to lure talent to his new label.
He recruited the best musicians in Detroit. He went to the Detroit neighborhoods and handpicked the very singers. The Miracles, Martha and the Vandellas, Mary Wells, they were all within that area. He wanted it all to be Detroit.
In the summer of 1960, Diane Ross asked for a favor from her former neighbor, Smokey Robinson. Robinson was serving triple duty as a writer, producer, and performer for Gordy's fledgling label.
They went for an audition when they were still in high school, 10th, 11th grade. Berry Gordy happened to be in the studio. He heard them and pretty much dismissed them.
He basically sent them away and told them to finish school.
And it was at this time, I think, that Betty, the original 4th girl, left, and then we got another 4th lady, Barbara Martin.
With a new voice in the mix, the Primettes set out to change Berry Gordy's mind.
They hung around every day. They were like the mascots. They made themselves known, and they made it clear that you were not going to get rid of them.
First we're outside the door, then we're on the steps, and then we're inside. And they needed hand claps one day, and we said, we'll do it.
Diane made an impression on her married boss.
Berry Gordy was probably the only one who saw something special in Diana Ross, because she was definitely the underdog. Diana was a little bit nasal. She wasn't always easy on the ear, and she certainly wasn't the prettiest girl at Motown either, but she was by far the most determined.
On January 15, 1961, Berry Gordy offered the Primettes a contract. The recording deal was a triumph of perseverance for the 4 girls from the Brewster Projects. But for 17-year-old Diane Ross, it was the beginning of a love-hate relationship destined to take her to highs and lows she could never even begin to imagine. In January 1961, the Primettes, Mary Wilson, Flo Ballard, Barbara Martin, and Diane Ross, were offered a contract by up-and-coming Detroit record producer Berry Gordy Jr. Berry Gordy saw the Primettes as young diamonds in the rough, very rough. The makeover began immediately.
First thing he did, said, girls, the name's got to go. Nobody's going to know what a Primette is.
We really weren't that thrilled about having to change our name from the Primettes. But what we did was each of us, would take, we would ask our families, our friends, our neighbors, you know, church, wherever we were, we say, we got to change our name. What do you suggest? So we got names from everybody.
This secretary there named Billie Jean Brown wrote down a couple of 3 names. And Florence saw Supremes, and it stood out. It was different than the other names. So she picked it.
For Berry Gordy, one of the problems was obvious. The Supremes didn't have a steady sound or image that made them stand out.
Mary would do the ballads, Florence would do the real soulful type songs, Diana would do the lighter type of material.
Before long, Diane was the top Supreme. The pressure really mounted when Martha and the Vandellas started landing one hit after another.
Come and Get These Memories, Heat Wave, Quicksand, these are now classic songs.
The songwriters behind these hits were 2 brothers, Eddie and Brian Holland, and their buddy Lamont Dozier. HDH quickly became the A-team at Motown and a ticket to the charts. With the Supremes going nowhere, Berry Gordy made a historic decision.
As a last-ditch effort, he went to Holland-Dozier-Holland and said, see what you can do on the Supremes.
The young songwriters were game, but they were not impressed by Diane's leads.
They were all in the sky, so to speak, and it gave off a very thin and kind of whiny nasal sound.
Still, HDH came through. The Supremes cracked the top 30 with When the Love Light Starts Shining Through His Eye.
And Holland-Dozier-Holland ceased to be our writers.
The unexpected success sent shockwaves through Motown. The Supremes were now on the map, and it was clear the king of the label had room for only one queen.
We had the same feeling that you would have if maybe your dad had younger children or took a liking to one of your other siblings. When he singled Diane out, I'm sure everybody felt that.
There are certain people that just happen to have that extra whatever it is, you know. Sometimes you can catch it on film and whatever, you know. So that, and he noticed that and he wanted to exploit it.
With Diane singing lead, HDH wrote a second single for the Supremes called Run, Run, Run. The record flopped. Then, fate intervened.
They came up with this song called Where Did Our Love Go? They presented it to the Marvelettes. Marvelettes didn't want to have anything to do with it. They thought it was silly, it was trite, it didn't have rhythm, it wasn't soulful.
The song was passed around Motown and eventually to the Supremes, but they didn't like the tune either.
They hated that song. They thought it was the worst piece of whatever.
Producer Eddie Holland refused to give up.
I said, this song is a hit. I don't care who sings it, as long as they could sing it with a soft voice. And previously I had heard Diana being recorded in very high keys. And I said, I knew that Mary Wilson had a soft voice. I said, let's do it on Mary. They said, no, 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 you're nuts. We want to do it on the song Diana. So I was overruled. I said, okay.
But Eddie got more than he bargained for. Diane tried to jazz up Where Did Our Love Go with a series of vocal riffs. Eddie put his foot down, and Diane sulked.
She was trying to sing it as dry as she possibly could. And the engineer was looking at her face. He turned to me, you know, as if to say, you know, you want me to stop this? I said, no, 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 don't stop it. Just let it go. She sang the whole song through. And then she got through. She said, is that what you wanted? I said, exactly. Thank you. She sang it perfectly.
In the late spring of 1964, the Supremes joined the Dick Clark Cavalcade of Stars tour. They were listed as others on the bill. That changed after Where Did Our Love Go was released as a single on June 17, 1964.
The minute that song hit the streets, it was off and running. And while they were touring with Dick Clark, they had no idea of the popularity the song was achieving. By the time the tour ended, they were the headlining act.
The Supremes left Detroit on a bus. They came home by plane.
And they came off the plane, man, strutting with this hair. It was like so funny, but at the same time, it was beautiful too.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
to see the success and that they had changed and they had arrived.
Where Did Our Love Go went all the way to #1 on the Billboard charts. Any doubts about the pecking order in the group were gone forever. Diane Ross was now the face of the Supremes, and the other girls had to accept that fact. On July 29, 1965, the Supremes opened at the Copacabana. The show was a smash, but the clear hit of the night was the new Diane Ross. Cool, suave and sophisticated. The next step in the makeover came when Diane told a reporter she was now officially going by the name on her birth certificate, Diana Ross.